The old-school auditorium buzzed with excitement as teenagers found their seats, their chatter bouncing off the high ceiling and worn wooden floors. The annual talent showcase was the biggest event of the spring semester at Westlake Academy, where students showed off everything from skateboard tricks to opera singing. Minji Park stood half-hidden behind the dusty curtains at the side of the stage, trying to calm her racing heart. She clutched her sheet music so tightly that the edges crumpled beneath her fingers. 3 months ago, she had been in Seoul, surrounded by familiar faces and the comfort of knowing exactly how to act, what to say, and where she belonged. Now she was here in this strange school in this strange country, where everything from the food to the jokes to the way people looked at her made her feel like she had landed on another planet. "You're on in 5 minutes," said Ms. Rivera, the music teacher who had somehow convinced Minji to sign up for this nightmare. The teacher smiled encouragingly, oblivious to the cold panic spreading through Minji's chest. "Remember what we practiced?" "You'll do great," Minji nodded, not trusting her voice. She hadn't wanted to join the showcase at all, but when Miss Rivera had heard her playing the old piano in the practice room after school one day, the teacher had been so excited, talking quickly about raw talent and emotional depth, words that Minji, still struggling with English, barely understood. Before she knew what was happening, her name was on the sign-up sheet. Now she peeked through the gap in the curtains at the crowd. The auditorium was nearly full. In the front row sat the group of girls who seemed to rule the school. Girls with perfect hair and expensive clothes who moved through the hallways like they owned them. Minji had learned their names quickly. Bella, the leader with sleek blonde hair who captained the debate team. Zoe, tall and athletic with an easy laugh. Lila, who wore designer clothes and whose father apparently owned half the town. They weren't exactly mean to Minji. Mostly they just looked through her as if she were invisible. Sometimes that felt worse than meanness. On stage, a boy finished his comedy routine to scattered applause. The principal stepped up to the microphone. "Next up, we have a piano performance by Minji Park." For a moment, Minji considered running. She could dash through the exit door, across the sports field, all the way home to the small apartment where she lived with her parents and younger brother. But then what? Hide forever? Besides, her parents had taken rare time off work to attend. They sat somewhere in the middle rows, her father still in his convenience store uniform, her mother wearing the nice dress she saved for important occasions. Minji couldn't disappoint them. She stepped onto the stage, the spotlight immediately finding her hot and blinding. The walk to the old upright piano seemed to take forever. She felt so plain in her simple blue dress from the discount store, so different from the stylish clothes the other girls wore. Her shoes, practical black flats her mother had insisted would last the whole school year, scuffed softly against the wooden floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. The audience seemed suddenly quieter, and in that quiet, Minji heard whispers. "Who is she again? That super quiet Korean girl, I think. Does she even speak English?" Minji sat at the piano bench, adjusting it slightly. The keys looked both familiar and foreign under the harsh stage lights. At home, she practiced on a small electronic keyboard. Nothing like this real piano with its weight and history. She placed her fingers on the cool ivory, took a deep breath, and began to play Chopin's Nocturne Op. 9 Ice No. 2. The first notes were shaky, but correct. Minji kept her eyes fixed on her hands, trying to pretend she was alone in her bedroom, not performing in front of the entire school. For a few measures, the music flowed, delicate and dreamy as it should be. Then her left hand slipped, hitting a jarring wrong note. She flinched but kept going. Then her right hand stumbled too, the melody faltering. Somewhere in the audience, someone snickered. The sound broke her concentration completely, and suddenly the beautiful piece she had practiced for weeks fell apart under her fingers. Another wrong note, then another. "Yikes," someone said, loud enough for the word to carry across the quiet auditorium. The laughter started then, not from everyone, but enough. A group of boys near the back, some of the popular girls in front. Not loud, not cruel exactly, but unmistakable. Little bursts of laughter, poorly disguised coughs, exaggerated winces when she hit particularly wrong notes. "Is this supposed to be music?" The whispered question came from the front row, followed by more giggles. "Maybe they don't have real pianos where she's from," another voice added. Minji's face burned. Her fingers felt numb and clumsy now. Barely following the sheet music she no longer needed to read. The beautiful nocturne was becoming a painful mess of sounds. She wanted to stop, to flee the stage. but some stubborn part of her refused to give up entirely. In the third row, she spotted her parents, her mother's worried face, her father's stiff smile. They had given up everything to move here. Their friends, their small but comfortable apartment, her father's office job for the night shifts at the corner store where he now worked. All so Minji and her brother could have better opportunities. Now look at her failing publicly, becoming exactly the kind of joke she had feared she would be. Her vision blurred with unshed tears. The laughter seemed to grow louder, surrounding her like a bubble she couldn't escape. Her shoulders hunched forward as if to shield herself from the sound. For a moment, Minji was no longer in the school auditorium. She was 7 years old, sitting in her grandmother's small apartment in Seoul. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, making patterns on the old upright piano that had belonged to her grandmother's mother before her. The apartment smelled of barley tea and the kimchi her grandmother was always making. "Sit up straight," her grandmother said, gently pushing Minji's shoulders back. "The music comes from inside you, not just your fingers. If you close yourself off, the music can't get out." Her grandmother's hands were gnarled with arthritis but still elegant as they demonstrated the piece, a simple Korean folk song about spring flowers. "Music speaks when words cannot," she told Minji. "When you feel lost, let your fingers tell your story." Minji had practiced for hours on that old piano, even when her friends called for her to come play outside. When her grandmother died 2 years later, Minji played at the funeral, her small hands somehow finding strength to carry the melody that her words, choked by grief, could not express. Back on the stage, Minji's fingers fumbled again. The piece was beyond saving now. A tear escaped despite her efforts, sliding down her cheek. She caught sight of Ms. Rivera standing in the wings, her face a mixture of sympathy and disappointment. Minji considered simply stopping, closing the piano lid and walking off stage. No one would blame her. They would forget about it eventually. This girl who couldn't even play a simple piece properly. She'd go back to being invisible, which suddenly seemed much better than being noticed like this. But her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in her ear. "When words fail you, let the music speak." Words certainly failed Minji here. Her English wasn't good enough to explain to these laughing strangers who she was, where she came from, what she felt like being dropped into this new world where everything was different and difficult. But maybe her music could not Chopin, though. Not now. Minji's hands hovered above the keys for a moment. The audience's attention was already drifting. Some had turned to their phones, bored by her failure. Others were whispering to friends, probably making more jokes at her expense. She closed her eyes briefly, thinking of her grandmother's apartment, of the mountains outside Seoul where they had hiked every spring to see the cherry blossoms, of her old friends and their late-night study sessions fueled by instant ramyeon and dreams of the future. She thought of her first day at this school, of sitting alone at lunch, of struggling to understand her teachers, of lying awake at night missing home so badly her chest ached. Then, instead of continuing with Chopin, Minji's fingers found a different melody, the Korean folk song her grandmother had first taught her, about spring returning after a long, hard winter. The unexpected change caused the audience to look up. The whispers paused. Minji didn't notice. Her eyes were closed now, her body swaying slightly as she played the haunting melody that reminded her of home. Her fingers moved with newfound confidence, no longer trembling. As the last notes of the folk song faded, she opened her eyes and looked out at the surprised faces of her classmates. Something had shifted in the room. The laughter had stopped. For the first time since arriving at this school, Minji felt truly seen, and she wasn't finished yet. Without thinking about what came next, Minji let her fingers drift from the Korean folk song into something new, something that hadn't existed until this moment. The melody came from somewhere deep inside her, a tune she hadn't planned but somehow knew by heart. It started softly, hesitantly, like the first day she had stepped into Westlake Academy, the left hand playing low, uncertain notes that echoed her fear, her confusion in this new place where nothing made sense. The right hand picked out a delicate, questioning melody above it, simple at first, then growing more complex. Minji forgot the audience, forgot the laughter, forgot everything except the feeling flowing from her heart to her fingertips to the keys beneath them. This was no longer a performance. It was a conversation with herself. The music asked questions she couldn't put into words. Why am I here? Will I ever belong? Will this strange place ever feel like home? Somewhere in the back of the auditorium, a phone that had been raised to record her embarrassment lowered slowly. The boy holding it leaned forward in his seat, brow furrowed as he tried to place the beautiful piece she was playing. In the front row, Bella whispered to Zoe, "What song is this?" Zoe shook her head, eyes fixed on Minji's swaying form. Minji didn't hear them. The music had carried her far away from the school auditorium, to a place between her past and present. Her hands moved faster now, the melody growing stronger, more insistent. This part of the music spoke of the anger she never showed, at her parents for uprooting her, at her classmates for not seeing her, at herself for not being braver. The composition built and built, her small body rocking slightly with the force of the emotions pouring through her fingers. The old piano, usually stubborn and slightly out of tune, seemed to come alive under her touch, resonating with a richness few had coaxed from it before. Ms. Rivera stood in the wings, clipboard forgotten in her hands. She had known Minji had talent, had heard glimpses of it during their practice sessions, but nothing like this. This wasn't just skill. This was pure, raw emotion translated into sound, the kind of playing that couldn't be taught. In the third row, Minji's mother reached for her husband's hand, squeezing it tightly. They had heard their daughter practice countless hours on the small keyboard they had managed to buy secondhand, but always behind her bedroom door. Always private. They had no idea she could play like this with such power and feeling. The melody shifted again, growing softer, more reflective. This part spoke of her grandmother, of the comfort of her small apartment with its lace curtains and the smell of barley tea. It spoke of cherry blossoms and childhood friends and belonging, of all she had lost. A tear slid down Minji's cheek, but she didn't notice. Her eyes were still closed, her body still swaying with the music. Unlike before, this tear wasn't born of shame but of release, of finally letting out everything she had kept bottled up since moving to this foreign place. The audience sat completely still now, many leaning forward in their seats. Even Mr. Chen, the stern orchestra conductor from the local university who had been invited to judge the showcase, had set aside his scoring sheet. His critical eye, which had found fault with every previous performance, was now wide with something like wonder. Minji's composition began to change again, the melody becoming more hopeful, more curious. This was the part about her future, still unwritten, about possibilities, about finding her voice in this new place, not despite her differences but because of them. Her right hand danced higher up the keyboard, playing notes that sparkled like sunlight on water. She had never played this piece before. It didn't exist until this moment, yet her fingers found each note with perfect certainty, as if the music had always been inside her, waiting to be discovered. In the front row, Lila put her phone down, the half-written mocking text forgotten. Next to her, Bella's expression had changed from amusement to something more complex. Surprise, certainly, but also a flickering of shame as she remembered her laughter from moments before. The music grew louder, more confident. Minji's back straightened, her shoulders no longer hunched in fear. This part of the music was about strength, about surviving, about taking the broken pieces of her old life and her new one and creating something beautiful from them. The principal, who had been checking his watch and thinking about cutting the performance short after the disastrous beginning, now stood transfixed at the side of the stage. In 15 years of running these showcases, he had never heard anything like this. Near the back of the auditorium, a door opened quietly, letting in a sliver of late afternoon sunlight. A few students from the orchestra, who had finished their own performances earlier and stepped out, slipped back in, drawn by the music floating down the hallway. Minji was building toward something now, her hands moving faster, the melody becoming more complex, more layered. This was the hardest part of her journey, the daily struggle to understand and be understood. The exhaustion of translating not just language but culture, expectations, the unspoken rules that everyone else seemed to know instinctively. Her fingers pounded the keys during one particularly powerful section, the force of it vibrating through the old piano. Then suddenly she pulled back, letting the notes become softer, more spacious. Like taking a deep breath after running too hard for too long, the audience seemed to breathe with her, the whole room inhaling and exhaling as one. In the final section of her improvised piece, Minji brought together threads from everything that had come before. echoes of the Korean folk song, hints of the anger and confusion, whispers of hope, but transformed now, woven into something new, something that wasn't Korean or American but uniquely hers. As she played the final notes, letting them hang in the air like a question mark, Minji opened her eyes. The spotlight was still blinding, but now she could make out faces in the audience. Faces that weren't laughing anymore. For one heartbeat, there was complete silence. Then a sound broke it. Not laughter this time, but the sharp intake of breath from Ms. Rivera, who hadn't realized she'd been holding it. Then came another sound. Mr. Chen, the intimidating orchestra conductor, pushing back his chair as he stood up. He was applauding. The sound seemed to break a spell. Suddenly, the whole auditorium erupted in applause. Ms. Rivera was clapping so hard her hands hurt. Minji's parents were on their feet, her mother wiping away tears, her father standing tall with pride radiating from his usually tired face. The orchestra students in the back were cheering. Even the group of popular girls was applauding, their earlier mockery forgotten or perhaps transformed into something like respect. Minji sat at the piano, stunned by the response. She hadn't played for them, not really. She had played for herself, to speak the words she couldn't say aloud. Yet somehow they had heard her, really heard her, perhaps for the first time since she had arrived at this school. Mr. Chen was making his way toward the stage, his stern face softened by something that might almost be a smile. Ms. Rivera was beckoning to Minji, gesturing for her to take a bow. Shakily, Minji stood up from the piano bench. Her legs felt weak, as if she had been running instead of sitting still. She took a small, awkward bow, the applause growing louder in response. "What was that piece called?" Ms. Rivera asked as Minji stepped into the wings, her voice filled with wonder. "I've never heard it before." Minji hesitated, searching for the right words in English. How could she explain that the music had no name, that it hadn't existed until moments ago, that it was simply the sound of her heart speaking when words failed her? It's just my story," she said finally, her voice soft but steadier than it had been in months. Ms. Rivera nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "It's beautiful," she said simply. Then glancing over Minji's shoulder, she added, "I think someone wants to speak with you." Minji turned to see Mr. Chen approaching, his scoring sheet forgotten in his hand. Behind him, she could see people in the audience turning to each other, their faces animated as they discussed what they had just heard. Some were looking at her with expressions she had never seen directed her way before. Curiosity, admiration, even a kind of wonder. For the first time since arriving in this country, Minji felt a small flicker of something like belonging. Not because she had become more like them, but because, for just a few minutes, they had truly seen her for who she was. And somewhere, she thought her grandmother might be smiling. "Young lady," Mr. Chen said, his voice softer than his stern appearance suggested. "May I have a word with you?" He glanced at the crowd still buzzing with excitement. "Perhaps somewhere quieter?" Minji nodded, following him and Ms. Rivera to a small room off the side of the stage where performers waited their turns. Her heart was still racing, her fingers tingling from the intensity of what had just happened. "That was extraordinary," Mr. Chen said once the door closed behind them. "Truly extraordinary." "Was that your own composition?" Minji hesitated, not sure how to explain. "Sort of. I mean, I didn't plan it. It just came out." Mr. Chen's eyebrows rose. "You improvised that entire piece?" "Just now." When she nodded, he exchanged a look with Ms. Rivera that Minji couldn't quite interpret. "I've been telling you she's special," Ms. Rivera said. "What did I say when I called you about our showcase?" "You undersold her," Mr. Chen replied, his eyes still on Minji. "Young lady, I'm the head of the music department at Westlake University. We have a special scholarship program for exceptional talents. I'd like to offer you private lessons starting next week." Minji blinked, certain she had misunderstood. Her English was still shaky sometimes. "Lessons? With you?" "Unless you'd prefer not to," he said, a hint of a smile breaking through his serious expression. "No. I mean, yes, I'd like that very much." Minji could hardly believe what was happening. Just minutes ago, she had been the girl everyone laughed at. Now this important man was offering her special lessons? "Excellent. We'll start Tuesday after school. Ms. Rivera can bring you to my office at the university." He handed her a card with his contact information. "And Minji, bring more of whatever that was you just played." I haven't been that moved by a student performance in 30 years of teaching. After Mr. Chen left, Ms. Rivera gave Minji a quick hug. I knew you were talented, but that was beyond anything I expected. You should go find your parents. They must be so proud. Minji nodded, still dazed by everything that had happened. She stepped back into the hallway where students were milling around during the short break before the second half of the showcase. The crowd parted slightly as she walked through. Instead of looking through her as if she were invisible, people were looking at her, really looking at her. A few students she didn't even know smiled or nodded as she passed. One boy from her math class gave her a thumbs up. That was amazing, said a voice to her right. Minji turned to see Zoe, one of the popular girls who had laughed earlier, standing by the water fountain. Her expression was different now, almost sheepish. What was that song? I've never heard it before. It wasn't really a song, Minji said quietly. Just feelings. Zoe looked at her with newfound curiosity. Well, it was incredible. I play violin, not nearly as well as you play piano, but maybe sometime we could. She trailed off, then shrugged. Anyway, great job. Before Minji could respond, she spotted her parents standing near the auditorium doors. Her mother was wiping tears from her eyes, and even her father, who rarely showed emotion, looked like he might cry. Her little brother Jinho was bouncing up and down beside them. Minji, he shouted when he saw her. You were so cool. Everyone was like... He mimicked an amazed expression, mouth hanging open, eyes wide. Her mother pulled her into a tight hug. We had no idea, she whispered in Korean. All this time you've been practicing behind your door. And we had no idea you could play like that. The music teacher at our old school said I was good. But nothing special, Minji replied in Korean, remembering the stern woman who had taught piano at her school in Seoul. I didn't know I could play like that either. It just happened. Her father, usually so reserved, put a hand on her shoulder. Your grandmother would have been very proud, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She always said you had a gift. The mention of her grandmother brought tears to Minji's eyes again. I felt her with me, she admitted. When I was playing, it was like she was helping me somehow. A small crowd had gathered around them, watching this exchange in a language they didn't understand. Minji noticed Bella standing at the edge of the group, looking uncertain. Your playing was beautiful, Bella said when she caught Minji looking at her. Then, more quietly, she added, I'm sorry about before. The laughing and stuff. It was mean. Minji was surprised by the apology. She hadn't expected that from Bella, who always seemed so confident, so above everyone else. It's okay, Minji said, not because it was, exactly, but because she suddenly felt too tired to hold on to any anger. It's not, Bella insisted, but thanks. She hesitated, then asked, Who taught you to play like that? My grandmother at first, Minji replied, but she died when I was 9. After that, I taught myself mostly. You taught yourself to play like that? Bella seemed genuinely shocked. I've taken piano lessons since I was 4 and I still mess up for Elise. Minji didn't know what to say to that. The conversation was interrupted when the principal appeared, asking everyone to return to their seats for the second half of the showcase. We'll wait for you outside after, her mother said in Korean, squeezing her hand before they headed back into the auditorium. Minji watched them go, still trying to process everything that had happened. As she turned to head backstage, she almost bumped into Lila, another member of the popular group. Hey, Lila said, looking uncomfortable. So I recorded the first part of your performance, when you were messing up, and I was going to post it. She looked down at her shoes. But I deleted it. I just thought you should know. Thank you, Minji said, surprised by yet another unexpected interaction. Lila nodded awkwardly and hurried off to join her friends. Backstage, the remaining performers were warming up or practicing last minute. Several nodded to Minji as she passed, a few offering congratulations. She had gone from being practically invisible to suddenly being seen by everyone. It was strange and a little overwhelming. She found a quiet corner and sat down, pulling out her phone to text her friend Soo Jin back in Seoul. They had been best friends since kindergarten, and even with the time difference and thousands of miles between them, Soo Jin was still the person Minji wanted to share this moment with. You won't believe what just happened, she typed in Korean. Before she could continue, Ms. Rivera appeared. Minji, there you are. Mr. Chen just called me. He wants you to play again at the end of the showcase, as the finale. Would that be okay with you? Minji's eyes widened. Play again today? But I don't have anything prepared. Ms. Rivera smiled. I think that's the point. He wants you to do what you just did, play from your heart. Can you do that one more time? Could she? Minji wasn't sure. The music that had poured out of her had been built up over months of loneliness and struggle. Now that she had released those feelings, would the music still come? But something had shifted inside her during that performance. A door had opened and she wasn't sure it could be closed again. The music was there, waiting. Different now, perhaps, but still hers to share. Yes, she said, surprising herself with her confidence. I can do it. The second half of the showcase flew by. Minji watched from the wings as singers, dancers, and musicians performed. They were all good. Some were excellent. But she noticed the audience seemed different now. More attentive, more appreciative. As if her performance had reminded them to really listen, to look beneath the surface. Finally, the last scheduled performer, a boy who played guitar, finished his song. The principal stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special treat to close our showcase tonight. After her moving performance earlier, Minji Park has agreed to play for us once more. The audience erupted in applause before Minji even stepped onto the stage. This time, the walk to the piano felt different. Her back was straighter, her steps more certain. She was still nervous, her hands still trembled slightly. But it was a different kind of nervousness. Not fear of failure, but the awareness that she had something important to share. As she sat at the piano, she looked out at the audience. Her parents and brother, her teachers, the students who had laughed at her and those who had simply never noticed her before. Mr. Chen, watching intently from the front row. They were all waiting to hear what she would play. What story she would tell them this time. Minji took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. For a moment, she wondered if the music would come again. Then she remembered her grandmother's words. The music comes from inside you, not just your fingers. If you close yourself off, the music can't get out. She opened herself up, to her past, to her present, to all the possibilities of her future in this new place. And once again, the music began to flow. The weeks following the talent showcase changed Minji's life in ways she could never have imagined. The morning after the performance, she had walked into school expecting everything to return to normal, for her brief moment in the spotlight to fade, and for the invisibility to return. Instead, she found herself suddenly visible. "Hey, piano girl," called a boy from her history class as she entered the building. That was awesome yesterday. At her locker, 2 girls from the choir stopped to ask if she'd consider accompanying them for the winter concert. In the hallway, a teacher she'd never even had stopped her to say how moved she'd been by the performance. Minji didn't know how to handle all the attention. She smiled shyly, thanked people, and tried not to trip over her words as she spoke. The English still felt clumsy in her mouth sometimes, especially when she was nervous. When Tuesday came, Ms. Rivera drove her to Westlake University for her first lesson with Mr. Chen. The campus was huge and intimidating, with tall buildings and students who looked so grown up rushing between classes. Minji clutched her music folder tightly as they walked through the winding paths to the music building. Mr. Chen's office was smaller than she expected, crammed with books, stacks of sheet music, and a baby grand piano that took up half the space. He greeted them with the same serious expression he'd worn at the showcase. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the piano bench. "Play something for me." "Anything you want." Minji hesitated. "What should I play?" "Whatever speaks to you today. I want to hear your voice, not someone else's." She thought for a moment, then began to play. Not an improvisation this time, but a piece she had been working on privately for months. A Korean folk song her grandmother had taught her, but arranged in her own way with elements of classical music woven through it. Mr. Chen listened without expression until she finished. Then he nodded once. "Good. You have natural talent and instinct. But talent without technique only goes so far. Are you willing to work hard?" "Yes," Minji said without hesitation. "It won't be easy." "I'm not an easy teacher." "I don't want easy," she replied. "I want to get better." Something almost like a smile flickered across his face. "Then we'll get along just fine." The lessons were indeed challenging. Mr. Chen pushed her harder than any teacher ever had. Some days she left feeling like her fingers might fall off from repeating the same difficult passages over and over. Other days she felt as if her brain might explode from trying to understand music theory in a language she was still learning. But she never thought about quitting. Not even once. At school, things were different too. She wasn't suddenly popular. She was still too quiet and too focused on her studies for that. But she was no longer invisible. People said hello in the hallways. Sometimes they asked about her music or her lessons with Mr. Chen, which had become something of a legend among the students. Most surprising was her new friendship with Zoe. It started with Zoe asking for help on a math problem during study hall one day. Minji had always been good at math. Numbers made sense to her in the same way music did. After helping Zoe, they had started talking about music. Zoe played violin in the school orchestra and had been taking lessons since she was 5. "But I'm not passionate about it like you are," Zoe admitted. "My parents want me to play, so I play. You play like you'd die if you couldn't." Minji had never thought of it that way, but maybe Zoe was right. Music had always been her way of speaking when words failed her. Now it was becoming something more, a bridge between her past and her future, between her Korean roots and her American present. One day in late April, about 6 weeks after the showcase, Mr. Chen made an unexpected announcement during their lesson. "There's a young composers competition at the State University next month," he said, placing a brochure on the piano. "I think you should enter." Minji stared at the brochure. The words 15th Annual Young Composers Showcase were printed across the top. Below was a picture of last year's winners, all older than her, standing on a grand stage with medals around their necks. "But I'm not really a composer," she protested. Mr. Chen raised an eyebrow. "What would you call what you did at the showcase?" "That was just playing what I felt. That's what composition is at its core, translating feeling into music. The rest is just technique, which is what I'm teaching you." He tapped the brochure. "You'll need to submit a recorded piece by next week, and if you're selected as a finalist, you'll perform live at the showcase." The idea terrified and excited Minji in equal measure. "Do you really think I'm good enough?" "I wouldn't waste my time if I didn't," Mr. Chen replied bluntly. "But it will take work. A lot of work. And you'll need to write down your composition this time, not just improvise." That night, Minji told her parents about the competition over dinner. Her mother immediately started planning. Who would drive her, what she would wear, how they would celebrate afterward. Her father nodded with quiet pride. Even Jinho seemed impressed. "Will you be on TV?" he asked through a mouthful of rice. "Don't talk with your mouth full," their mother scolded automatically. "And don't ask silly questions. This is a serious competition." "It's okay," Minji said, ruffling her brother's hair. "No, probably not TV. But if I make it to the finals, you can all come watch me play." Later, alone in her room with her keyboard, Minji tried to capture the piece she had played at the showcase. But it felt different now. That music had come from a place of loneliness, of being an outsider. She wasn't in exactly the same place anymore. She closed her eyes and thought about where she was now, still finding her way, still learning the language and customs of this new place, but no longer completely lost. She thought about her lessons with Mr. Chen, about Zoe's unexpected friendship, about the way her parents looked at her now, with a new kind of respect. Her fingers found a melody, similar to what she had played before but evolving. Changing, growing as she herself was growing. She recorded it on her phone, then played it back, making notes on where to change things, how to develop certain themes. For the next week, she worked on the piece every spare moment. Before school, during lunch, late into the night, she scribbled notes on staff paper, recorded versions on her phone, experimented with different variations. Mr. Chen helped her refine it, suggesting changes to structure but always insisting that the heart of it remain hers. "Don't try to sound like Chopin or Mozart or even me," he said. "Sound like Minji Park, that's who they want to hear." The day the recording was due, she stayed after school to use the piano in the music room. Ms. Rivera helped her set up the equipment to make a proper recording. Minji played the piece 3 times all the way through. The 3rd time felt right. Not perfect, but honest. That was the version they submitted. "Now we wait," Ms. Rivera said as they sent off the digital file. The waiting was the hardest part. Minji tried to focus on her schoolwork, on her regular lessons with Mr. Chen, on the everyday business of adjusting to life in America. But her mind kept returning to the competition. What if they didn't like her music? What if they thought it was too different, too strange? What if she wasn't selected as a finalist? 2 weeks after submitting her recording, Minji was practicing in the music room after school, when Ms. Rivera burst in, waving her phone. "You made it. You're a finalist." Minji's fingers froze on the keys. "Really? Really? Mr. Chen just called me. He got the email from the competition organizers. You'll perform live at the showcase next Saturday." The news spread quickly through the school. By the next morning, it seemed everyone knew. Teachers congratulated her in class. Students she barely knew wished her luck in the hallways. At lunch, Zoe insisted Minji sit with her and her friends, including Bella and Lila. It was still strange being at that table, but less uncomfortable than it would have been months ago. "So this competition is a big deal, huh?" Lila asked, picking at her salad. "Pretty big," Zoe answered before Minji could. "Winners get scholarship money and usually end up at music schools like Juilliard or Berkeley." Bella leaned forward. "Are you nervous?" Minji nodded. "Very." "You'll be amazing," Zoe said confidently. "We're all coming to watch, by the way." "You are?" Minji was surprised, of course. The whole music department is going. Ms. Rivera is organizing a bus. The idea of her classmates coming to watch her perform made Minji's stomach twist with anxiety. It was one thing to play for strangers, another entirely to play for people who knew her, who had seen her at her worst and at her best. That Saturday morning, Minji woke early. She laid out the outfit she and her mother had chosen, a simple blue dress that somehow made her feel both Korean and American at the same time. As she got ready, she thought about how far she had come since that day at the showcase. The piece she would play today was called Between Worlds, a name Mr. Chen had suggested after listening to the final version. It wasn't just music anymore. It was her story, translated into a language everyone could understand. A story about leaving one home and finding another, about being caught between cultures, between past and future, about finding her voice in a place where she had once felt voiceless. As she fastened the jade pendant her grandmother had given her around her neck, Minji felt a strange calm settle over her. Whatever happened at the competition today, she had already won something more important. She had found herself in this new place, found a way to belong without losing who she was. She was ready. The State University Concert Hall was bigger than any place Minji had ever performed. Through the backstage curtain, she peeked at the audience filling the rows of seats. Hundreds of people, their faces a blur in the dim lighting. Somewhere out there sat her parents and brother, Mr. Chen, Ms. Rivera, and a bus full of students from Westlake Academy. The thought made her stomach tighten with nerves. 5 minutes, a staff member said, checking something off on his clipboard before hurrying away. Minji closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had practiced her piece countless times. Mr. Chen had worked with her for hours after school each day this week, refining every note, every dynamic marking, every pause. Remember, he had told her during their final practice yesterday, technical perfection isn't what will make you stand out. Anyone can play the right notes. What they want to hear is your story, Minji's story, a story of leaving home, of feeling lost, of finding herself through music. A story told not with words but with melodies that spoke of both sorrow and hope. The backstage area was crowded with the other 9 finalists, all older than Minji, most of them high school juniors and seniors with years of composition training. They carried themselves with the confidence of experience, chatting easily with each other about music schools and previous competitions. Minji stood apart, feeling every bit the outsider again. A tall boy with glasses noticed her standing alone and came over. "First time?" he asked kindly. Minji nodded. "Mine too," he said. "I'm terrified." Somehow, knowing that even this confident-looking older boy was scared made Minji feel a little better. "Me too," she admitted. "I heard your submission recording," he said. "It was beautiful. Different from anything else. You're going to do great." Before Minji could respond, the stage manager appeared. 2 minutes, everyone. Get ready. Minji Park, you're up first. First. The word echoed in Minji's head as she followed the stage manager toward the stage entrance. She would have preferred to go later, to have a chance to watch others perform first. But Mr. Chen had told her that going first could be an advantage. "You set the standard," he had said. "Make them remember you." The stage lights were blinding as Minji walked toward the grand piano at center stage. The applause seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding her. She couldn't make out individual faces in the audience, just a sea of people watching her every move. She sat at the piano bench, adjusting it slightly. This piano was nicer than any she had played before. its keys a perfect ivory white under the stage lights. She placed her hands on them, feeling their cool smoothness against her fingertips. For a moment, doubt crept in. What was she doing here? Competing against students with years more training. What if she froze? What if the music didn't come? Then in the silence before she began, Minji thought she heard her grandmother's voice. The music comes from inside you. If you close yourself off, the music can't get out. Minji took a deep breath, straightened her back as her grandmother had taught her, and began to play. The first notes of Between Worlds filled the concert hall, soft questioning notes that spoke of uncertainty, of standing at a threshold between one life and another. The melody was based on a Korean lullaby her grandmother used to sing, but transformed, interwoven with elements that Mr. Chen had helped her develop, hints of classical structure, jazz-inspired harmonies, and a rhythm that somehow captured the pulse of her new American life. As she played, Minji forgot about the audience, forgot about the competition. She was transported back to her grandmother's apartment in Seoul, to the day of the school talent showcase, to her first lesson with Mr. Chen, to all the moments that had led her here. Her fingers moved with confidence now, finding each note exactly as she had written it, but also discovering new depths in the music as she played. The piece built slowly, the melody growing more complex, the harmonies richer. This middle section spoke of confusion, of struggling to find her place. The left hand played a steady, insistent rhythm while the right hand searched for resolution, sometimes finding it, sometimes slipping away into dissonance again. Then came the turning point, the moment in the composition where everything changed, where fear turned to courage, where loneliness opened up to connection. The music became brighter, more hopeful, building towards something new. As Minji approached the final section of her piece, she opened her eyes briefly. Through the stage lights, she could just make out the first row of the audience. Mr. Chen was there, his usual stern expression softened. Beside him sat a woman Minji didn't recognize, elegant in a dark dress, leaning forward in her seat, completely absorbed in the music. Minji closed her eyes again and poured everything she had into the final minutes of her composition. This was the part about finding her voice, about discovering that she could be both Korean and American, both her grandmother's granddaughter and her own person. The melody soared, drawing together threads from throughout the piece, weaving them into something whole and complete. The final notes hung in the air, resonant and clear, then silence. For a heartbeat, Minji wondered if she had somehow failed, if the audience hadn't understood what she was trying to say through her music. Then the applause began, building quickly into a thunderous sound that filled the concert hall. Minji stood and bowed as she had been taught, overwhelmed by the response. As she walked off stage, legs shaky with adrenaline and relief, the other young composers waited with wide eyes. "That was incredible," whispered the tall boy with glasses. Several others nodded in agreement. Minji smiled shyly, still not used to such praise. The rest of the competition passed in a blur. Minji watched the other finalists perform from the wings, impressed by their skill and creativity. Many had been composing for years. Some had already been accepted to prestigious music schools. Their pieces were technically brilliant, some very avant-garde, others firmly rooted in classical traditions. When all 10 finalists had performed, they were called back on stage to stand together while the judges deliberated. Minji stood between the tall boy with glasses and a girl with a long braid, all of them shifting nervously under the stage lights. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, the judges returned. The head judge, a famous composer whose name Minji recognized from Mr. Chen's lessons, approached the microphone. "All of our finalists today have shown remarkable talent and creativity," he said. "It gives me great hope for the future of music to see such passionate young composers." He went on to praise various aspects of the performances, before finally reaching for the envelope containing the results. "Our third-place winner, receiving a $500 scholarship, is Thomas Lee for his piece Urban Symphony." The tall boy with glasses stepped forward to accept his certificate, beaming with pride. "Our second-place winner, receiving a $1,000 scholarship, is Audrey Wilson for her composition Reflections on Water." A girl with short curly hair moved forward, looking both thrilled and disappointed. Minji held her breath. Even making it to the finals had been more than she'd ever expected. She would be happy just to have had this experience, to have shared her music with this audience. And our first place winner, receiving a $2,500 scholarship and the opportunity to have their composition performed by the university orchestra next fall, is, the pause seemed to stretch forever, Minji Park for Between Worlds. For a moment, Minji didn't move. She was sure she had misheard. But the other finalists were looking at her, smiling, and the audience had erupted in applause. The girl with the braid gave her a gentle nudge forward. Minji stepped up to accept the certificate and medal, hands trembling slightly. The head judge leaned close to the microphone. Minji is our youngest ever winner at just 15 years old. Her composition showed not only technical skill, but a depth of emotion and cultural synthesis rarely seen in composers twice her age. As Minji turned to face the audience, medal around her neck, she finally spotted her family. Her mother was openly crying. Her father was clapping harder than she had ever seen him applaud anything, and Jin-ho was jumping up and down in his seat. Behind them, she could see the students from Westlake. Zoe was on her feet cheering, and even Bella and Lila were applauding enthusiastically. Later, in the reception hall, Minji was surrounded by well-wishers. Music professors handed her their cards. Parents of other finalists congratulated her. The elegant woman who had been sitting next to Mr. Chen introduced herself as the dean of the University's music school and invited Minji to consider applying when she was older. "You have a unique voice," the woman said, "and that's the most precious thing a musician can possess." As the crowd finally thinned, Minji found a quiet moment with her family. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering Korean endearments in her ear. Her father, never one for many words, simply said, "Your grandmother would be proud." Coming from him, it was everything. On the bus ride back to Westlake, Minji sat next to Zoe, the medal still around her neck. She felt tired, but in the best possible way. Wrung out, but fulfilled. "How does it feel?" Zoe asked. "To win something this big?" Minji thought about it. "It feels like being heard," she said finally. "Really heard?" Zoe nodded as if this made perfect sense. Outside the bus windows, the landscape rushed by, a blend of old and new, of natural beauty and human creation. Not so different from Korea in some ways, yet uniquely American in others. Minji leaned her head against the cool glass, watching it all pass. She wasn't fully Korean anymore, not after these months in America. But she wasn't American either, not entirely. She existed somewhere in between, carrying both worlds inside her. And for the first time, that in-between place didn't feel lonely. It felt like exactly where she was meant to be.